I found a text message on my phone that I have no memory of sending. It's a text sent from my phone to a woman named Trish Dunbar, who I met once, briefly, in a coastal town called Harrow Inlet. During the 3 weeks I wish I could give back more than any other 3 weeks of my life. The message reads, "I've been looking into Denton's business accounts. There's money that doesn't add up. I thought you deserved to know before anyone else does." I have no memory of sending it. The timestamp is 11:47 p.m. on a Thursday in November. I have no memory of being awake at 11:47 p.m. that Thursday. I have no memory of looking into Denton Dunbar's business accounts, and I have no memory of deciding that Trish Dunbar needed to hear anything from me at all. What I do remember is what happened to her family in the 14 hours after that message was delivered. I'll get to that. My name is Ward Calloway, and before I tell you about Harrow Inlet, I need you to understand something about how I was already doing going in. My last investigation, the Aldemir case, had left marks that weren't fading. I still caught myself slipping into language that wasn't mine. Words like committee and clarified and harmony surfacing in my notes when nothing I was writing had anything to do with any of those things. And there were still mornings where I'd sit down at my desk and notice, a few minutes in, that I was sitting straighter than I used to. Both of these things still happening months later. I told myself I was managing it. I wasn't managing it. Harrow Inlet is a coastal town of about 4,000 people, the kind of place that gets one paragraph in travel guides under the heading Hidden Gems and is then immediately forgotten. Fishing heritage, a decent harbor, 3 restaurants that have rotated through ownership every few years without ever quite improving. The kind of town where everyone knows everyone else's business, and nobody finds that strange. For 18 months before I arrived, something had been using that fact like a weapon. I had been contacted by a woman named Claire Billings, who ran the town's only bookshop. She'd been watching what was happening and taking notes, which immediately told me 2 things about her. She was paying attention when everyone else had stopped, and she was scared enough to want a record. I drove to Harrow Inlet on a gray Monday in November. Claire met me at the bookshop on my first morning. She slid a manila folder across the counter before I'd even taken my coat off. Inside was a hand-drawn timeline, 18 months of incidents, dates on the left, names in the middle, question marks everywhere the origin couldn't be traced. "You made this yourself?" I said. "I made 3 copies," she said. "One's in a safety deposit box in the next county. One I mailed to my sister. This is the 3rd. She looked at me steadily. "I'm telling you that so you'll know I'm aware this is the kind of thing that has a way of disappearing." I liked her immediately. I want to say that clearly because of what comes later. Rather than walk me through the timeline all at once, Claire suggested I spend my first few days talking to people. Let the picture build itself, she said. She'd found that trying to explain it front to front made it sound like paranoia. Better to let me find the shape of it on my own. She was right, and what I found over those first few days was worse than anything she could have summarized in a folder. The first person I spoke to was a man named Gerald, a retired fisherman who had lived in Harrow Inlet his entire life. He'd watched a 30-year business partnership between two local families dissolve overnight, 8 months earlier. He described it simply. Mick came into the harbor one morning and told Desmond something about the books. He said, something specific about money. Desmond went white. They haven't spoken since. What did Mick say exactly? Gerald shook his head. That's the thing. Mick swears he doesn't remember saying anything. And the strangest part is, I believe him. I've known Mick 40 years. He looked genuinely lost when Desmond confronted him about it. The next person I spoke to described something almost identical. A school principal forced out of his job after an accusation that started with a whisper between two parents at a hardware store. Within 72 hours, it had become a formal complaint with 15 signatures. The accusation was eventually found to be false. The principal was not rehired. The two parents who started it couldn't agree on who had spoken first or who had said what. Both described the other as the source. Both sounded genuinely uncertain. By the end of my 3rd day, I had spoken to 11 people, and the pattern that emerged wasn't gossip. Gossip spreads outward and dilutes. What was happening in Harrow Inlet spread outward and intensified. Each time a piece of information passed through a new person, it arrived sharper, more precise, more perfectly aimed. I went back to Claire that evening and told her what I was seeing. She poured 2 glasses of something she kept under the counter and pushed one toward me. It finds the exact thing that will do the most damage, she said, and then it finds the exact person to say it to. I wrote that down. I met Trish Dunbar on my 5th day in town. Her husband, Denton, ran one of the fishing operations out of the harbor. His family had worked that boat for nearly 3 decades. He'd learned the trade from his father on it. By the account of everyone I spoke to, including people who didn't particularly like either of them, the Dunbars had a solid marriage, the kind that doesn't advertise itself. I interviewed Trish at Claire's bookshop. She was guarded at first, the way everyone in Harrow Inlet was guarded. But she warmed up over the course of an hour in the way people do when they've been carrying something alone for too long and someone finally asks the right questions. She said something almost in passing that I wrote down immediately. The thing that bothers me the most about this town right now, she said, isn't what people are saying. It's that nobody can remember saying it. I remember the feeling of being told things. I remember where I was standing. I remember the specific cold of hearing something you can't unhear. But when I try to picture who told me, there's just a voice. And I'm not even sure it was one voice. I think it might have come from more than one direction. I asked her if she thought the things she'd heard were true. She was quiet for a long moment. I think they were true enough, she said. That's what makes it impossible to let go of. It wasn't a lie. It was a version of something real, shaped into a weapon. A version of something real, shaped into a weapon. I underlined that 3 times. By the end of my first week, I had a working theory. The entity in Harrow Inlet, if indeed that's what it is, didn't fabricate. It couldn't create something from nothing. What it could do was find the true things people carried privately, the specific fears and shames, suspicions they'd never voiced, and move them from one person to another through willing, unwitting mouths. It needed a host for each transmission, a few seconds of access, enough to place the right words in the right mouth at the right time. Then it moved on before the host even registered what they'd said. The host never remembered. The recipient always did. I started watching conversations differently, not for what was being said, but for the moment of transmission itself, the slight pause before a particular sentence, the brief blankness in someone's expression, less than a second before something specific and targeted came out of their mouth, like a skip in a record, a clean interruption in the signal. I saw it happen once at the harbor. Two men I didn't know. One of them paused mid-sentence, went briefly vacant, and said something to the other in a low voice I couldn't hear. The second man's face changed, not dramatically, just a small internal shift. The kind that means something has landed somewhere it can do damage over time. They parted ways. The first man walked off, and within 30 seconds, he was laughing at something with no apparent awareness that anything had happened. I went back to Claire that evening and told her what I'd seen. She nodded slowly, like she'd been waiting for me to see it. "I've been very careful about what I say," she said. "For 14 months, I think about every sentence before it comes out. I don't say anything I'm not certain is mine." She looked at her glass, "And I'm still not entirely sure it hasn't been through me at least once. I said something to my sister 8 months ago that I've never been able to fully account for. Something specific about her husband that I shouldn't have known. My sister and I still haven't recovered from it." She said it quietly, without drama, the way you state a fact you've had a long time to make peace with and haven't quite managed to. I didn't sleep well that night, not because of what Claire had told me about herself, because of what it meant for me. I was in Harrow Inlet asking questions, talking to people, gathering information, moving pieces of what people had told me between conversations, connecting dots, working out what each person knew that the others didn't. I was doing exactly what the entity did. I was the perfect host. By then, whatever was moving through Harrow Inlet had already made up its mind about me. What happened on the Thursday of my second week, I'm going to tell you as cleanly as I can, given that I'm working from a timestamp and a message I don't remember sending. I had dinner alone at one of the harbor restaurants. I know this because I paid with a card and the receipt exists. I walked back to my rental property, which takes about 12 minutes. I know this because it always takes about 12 minutes. After that, 3 hours simply aren't there. I have receipts, I have timestamps, I have browser history showing activity I don't recognize as mine. I have no memory of any of it, not a fragment, not a feeling, nothing. My next clear memory is sitting at my desk with my laptop open and my notes spread out in front of me, feeling completely normal. The way you feel completely normal when you wake up in a familiar place with no immediate reason for alarm. It took me several minutes to notice the time. It took me another minute to check my phone. The text to Trish Dunbar had been sent at 11:47 p.m. I read it 3 times. Then I put the phone down and sat very still for a long time, doing the specific kind of internal inventory you do when you're trying to determine how much of yourself is still where you left it. I didn't know anything about Denton's business accounts. I was certain of that. I had met Trish once for an hour in Claire's bookshop. Nobody in my interviews had mentioned money in connection with either of them. Whatever sent that message had access to information I simply didn't have. It had used my phone, my name, and my credibility as an investigator and my access to Trish's trust. And it had delivered something that would have landed with the specific weight of a professional warning rather than a rumor. I called Claire. It was past midnight, but she answered on the second ring, which told me she hadn't been sleeping either. I told her what I'd found. There was a long silence on the line, longer than I was comfortable with. Then she said, "Trish called me 2 hours ago. She confronted Denton. There was a fight." I waited. "Ward?" Her voice was careful in a way that told me she was choosing her words. "She took the kids and left tonight." I couldn't find anything to say for a moment. I'd spent years investigating damage after it had already happened, arriving at scenes, talking to people in the aftermath, reconstructing events from whatever remained. This was different. This was the damage happening in real time, and my name was on it. And somewhere across town, Trish Dunbar was putting her children in a car in the middle of the night because of a message sent from my phone. "Is she okay?" I finally managed. "She's at her mother's," Claire said. "Denton has been calling. She's not picking up." Pause. "There was something about the business accounts, Ward. Something Denton apparently confirmed when she pushed him on it. Whatever was in that message, it wasn't entirely wrong." "It was shaped," I said. "Yes," she said quietly, "shaped." I want to tell you what happened to the Dunbar family in the weeks after that night, because I think you should know the full weight of it. Trish didn't go back, not immediately, and then not at all. The money issue turned out to be a financial decision Denton had made without telling her. Not criminal, not malicious, the kind of thing that happens in small business partnerships and gets worked out quietly between the people who trust each other. But it didn't get worked out quietly because Trish hadn't heard about it from Denton in their kitchen on an ordinary evening when they could have talked it through. She'd heard about it from an investigator she'd met once at 11:47 at night, in a message worded to sound like a professional warning from someone who had been digging into her husband's finances. That framing changed everything. It made a private mistake look deliberate, something hidden, and once Trish saw it that way, she couldn't unsee it. By the time I left Harrow Inlet, Denton had closed the business, not because the financial issue was unresolvable, but because the harassment from others in town had made operating it impossible. Whatever the entity had moved through me that night had reached others' ears besides Trish's. The information had been replicated the way it always did in Harrow Inlet, each transmission sharpening it further. By the third week, The story circulating about Denton Dunbar bore almost no resemblance to the truth. He sold the boat, the one his father had taught him on, the one he'd worked for nearly 30 years. He took a job on a commercial vessel out of the harbor 2 hours up the coast, which meant he was gone for weeks at a time, which meant that even the possibility of repairing things with Trish became logistically complicated on top of emotionally complicated. Claire told me later that Trish had filed for divorce 6 weeks after I left. I sent Trish a letter, handwritten, because I didn't trust my phone. I tried to explain what I believed had happened. I don't know if she believed me. I don't know if I would believe me either if I was her. A stranger with a recorder and a business card shows up in your town, meets you for an hour, and 3 days later, your marriage starts coming apart at the seams with his name on the message that started it. I haven't heard back. Here is what Claire found afterwards, going deeper into Harrow Inlet's local records than I'd had time to go. The entity has been here before. References buried in meeting minutes and letters from the 1940s and again in the 1970s, periods of unusual community fracture, neighbors at war with no clear origin, information surfacing that nobody could account for, a phrase that appeared in multiple accounts from both eras, the wrong words in the right mouth. It comes back. It has always come back. Harrow Inlet, with its small, tight population and its deep habit of knowing everyone's business, is the ideal environment. It doesn't manufacture anything. The raw material is already there. All it needs is access. Then Claire found something else, something I wish she hadn't. In the 1940s, during the worst of it, the town brought in an outside investigator, a private inquiry agent from the city. His name appeared in the meeting minutes only once, in a single line, noted without explanation. The inquiry agent was thanked for his visit and his many contributions to the community's understanding of it. The minutes from the following month showed the fractures had worsened considerably. The outside investigator had been the most effective host of that entire period. I've read that line more times than I can count. The new thing I noticed in the weeks after Harrow Inlet is this. I've become afraid of my own voice. Not in a way that stops me from functioning, but there are moments mid-conversation where I become suddenly aware of what I'm saying and who I'm saying it to. A split-second interruption. Like patting my pockets to make sure my wallet is still there, checking that words coming out are actually mine. Most of the time, they are. I'm aware that most of the time is not the same as always. And there are still mornings when I sit down at the desk and notice I'm sitting straighter than I used to. Still the occasional word surfacing in my notes that belongs to Aldenmere rather than to me. Committee, clarified, harmony. Those things haven't gone. I don't think they're going anywhere. 3 cases now, 3 different entities, 3 different methods, and the same result each time. Something of each place staying with me after I leave. Something I carry into the next investigation, like contamination I can't identify or isolate. I'm starting to understand that careful isn't the same as safe. And that the most dangerous thing I do in any of these cases isn't getting close to the entity, it's talking to people. Ward Calloway Case File 3, status unresolved. If you've ever said something that hurts someone, something specific and precise and perfectly aimed, and found yourself unable to fully account from where it came or from why you said it at that particular moment to that particular person, I'm not going to tell you it was the entity in Harrow Inlet, but I'm not going to tell you it wasn't. Case File 4 is already open. I didn't want to open it. I opened it anyway because that's what I do, and because I'm beginning to think that might be exactly the problem. Stay careful, and maybe, for a while, stay quiet.